update the.
Yeah, so I was just saying that I will hit the record button right now. We're set.
Great. Could you also upgrade Loretto, the sign language interpreter?
I'm sorry, what was the name again?
ASL interpreter Loretto. Just one moment, folks. We'll get started as soon as we have the ASL interpreter online.
Is this view okay for you all?
Great. All right. I'm Rachel Kimmerford from Macmillan Learning, and I'm happy to welcome you to Accessing Higher Ground's 2021 virtual conference. This presentation is Annotations for All, Creating Accessible and Understandable Annotated and Marked Up Content. And we're pleased to have Laura Ciprian from McGraw-Hill with us to lead the presentation. She'll tell you more about herself when we get started. But first, I need to share a few housekeeping items. If you're with me now, you were successful in joining this Zoom webinar. However, if you have any technical questions or difficulties throughout the presentation, use the chat box and we'll be in touch. You can also email or text Richard Allegra at richard@ahead.org or dial 704-774-9979 or email Howard Kramer at hg@ahead.org or text 720-351-8668. I will put this in the chat for everybody. The slides for this session should be available on the AHG conference schedule site or the directory for all sessions. Find the name of the session, select the name of the session link, then scroll down to the bottom of the session information. You should find the speakers' uploaded slides and other handouts in PDF format. Some speakers also uploaded their PowerPoint version of their slides. You can find these if you select the handouts link near the bottom of the session information page. The presenters will be taking questions through the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. You can add questions at any time. The presenters may not get to them immediately, but will do their best to answer as many questions as possible. We'll be saving questions for the end of this presentation. Try not to use the chat area to ask questions to the speaker. You can make comments or offer resources as mentioned above and ask for help with technical issues. You can designate yourself as anonymous in the Q&A. Note that Q&A and chat will be saved and distributed to the audience after the session. Like all the virtual conference, this presentation will be recorded and available for the next week, if not sooner. And with that, I am happy to introduce Laura.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Annotations for All, Creating Accessible and Understandable Annotated and Marked Up Content. So today, I'm going to start off by going through the goal of the presentation, and then I'm going to tell you a bit about the Annotated and Marked Up Text project. And then the bulk of what we're going to do today is go through our steps for creating accessible, visually complex content. And I'm going to close out with some final tips. Now, just a note, the content in this presentation does not represent real content. It's just samples for illustrative purposes only. In Star Trek, Spock and Kirk have said, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one." But for accessibility, we need to change that a bit. And in an English composition course, we would show the changes this way. Here we have that same original quote, but certain parts of it are crossed out and there's other text that's been inserted. And that results in the quote changing to, final quote, "The needs of the few or the one must be considered alongside the needs of the many." Accessibility. So the goal of today's presentation, I will present our approach to thinking and working through the accessibility challenges of our annotated and marked up content project. And you will come away with ideas on how to apply the approach to making your own highly complex and visual content presentations more accessible. Obligatory about me slide. I'm a certified professional in accessibility core competencies. I have a master's in educational communication and technology from NYU. In 2009, I started working at McGraw-Hill Higher Ed, and I was focused on improving the instructional design of the content to which I was assigned. And then in 2015, I moved exclusively to content accessibility. In case we get to run into each other live at a conference, I'm short, white, female, left-handed, and pretty smiley. At this point, I'm going to turn off my video so it becomes a little bit easier to just be focusing on the PowerPoint and on the interpreter for those of you who need it. Ooh, pardon me. Now, about the annotated and marked up content project itself. English composition courses help students improve their writing and editing skills. The main flow of the textbook content explains various rules and principles, and a plethora of models show those principles in practice. Those models are explained with annotations and markup to emulate what an instructor would point out or change about each model. There are two main types. There are annotated writings, which are writing samples that have commentary pointing out the key features within the content that exemplify what's described in the main text. And then there's also marked up content. Sample sentences, etc., with features called out and content changed. We've already seen an example of proofreading marks, but there's also things like arrows that connect ideas, highlights and brackets that group phrases, text that's added to identify the function of other text, etc. The problem is that due to complex layout needs, all of this was done previously as images. Most of the information is conveyed by the layout, formatting, and visual style that's created for the print textbook. Unfortunately, when it came time to translate that into the ebook, we had to resort to images of that layout with long image descriptions to explain them, which clearly is not ideal for accessibility. So to give you an example of one of these sort of annotated essays, here is how it would be as an image. There's some text from the textbook, then what looks like a piece of paper with the essay written on it. Parts of the essay have been colored in, and there are little squares or rectangles rather of different colored text that are overlapping that piece of paper somewhat. We also have marked up examples. So you might have a paragraph where the whole thing is highlighted in different colors, and you have a key alongside of it that tells you one color means it's a topic sentence, another means it's relevant, and another means it's irrelevant. Or you might have some sentences where there's a few words that are highlighted, and then those words and some others have a bracket above them, which labels them as things like adjective phrases or adverb phrases. And then from that label, an arrow points to some other words. Another example might be sentences that have abbreviated labels above them, such as SV and DO. And then two different words that are highlighted, one in yellow and one in blue, and an arrow that points from the blue word to the yellow word. All of these kinds of things signal meaning within the textbook. Here we also have the example we've seen before of proofreading marks. Lines through certain text, carets under text, and above that caret, added text above. So what are the steps to making visually complex content accessible? Well, first, you're going to gather your team and define the project, question absolutely everything about the current approach, evaluate the accessibility concerns, come up with possible solutions, test those with users, revise and finalize, and finally, of course, take pride in your accomplishment. So step one is to gather the appropriate team. Now, there are several required perspectives to make sure that you end up with a good product. Obviously, you're going to need people who understand the content really well. They're going to need to answer a lot of questions about what it means and what is required for it. Then, clearly, you're going to need someone with accessibility expertise. It's also important to involve instructional design or visual designers in this kind of a project, because again, as a visual presentation of content, you need to make sure that the end result is still conveying visually the key information, and also that it's organized well for everybody. On the back end, you're going to need people who are going to be either coding or implementing it. In our case, we were coding it and we had engineers on hand to be doing that. But in your case, it might be that you're using something like an LMS and you'll need someone to be building templates for people to fill in when they're authoring this type of content, or even just writing guidelines that explain to people how to author the content in a way that makes it accessible. And of course, last but not least, you need real end users. And it's best to have all of these people involved throughout every step of the process. Diversity of thought leads to better questions, better answers, and better outcomes. Now, unfortunately, in our particular case, I wasn't able to bring end users into the project until partway through when we got to the testing phase. But you may have the advantage of working at a college or a university where you have a disability services office. You might be able to actually recruit students from there to help you with your projects. If you can, take advantage of that as much as possible. So once you have your team together, you need to define what this project is actually going to be. What broad criteria does your solution need to meet? And you're going to need to come back to these core requirements throughout the project to make sure you haven't gone off on a bit of a tangent. During this stage, you also want to identify as best you can the full scope of content you need to solve for. So in our case, we had our content team scouring the various textbooks to find every possible different variation on an arrow that they could find, to make sure that we were actually solving for all of the presentations that we needed. And it's also important at this point to decide where you're going to first implement this project, because you need to make sure that in the first phase of it, you are solving for all of the problems that arise in the first place you're going to be implementing it. And later, you're going to definitely plan for other implementations, but it's still important to know where you're going to start. So in our project, the initial success criteria were, it needed to be readable text. As previously mentioned, we did not want to have images of text anymore. It was also very important to preserve the current visual presentation because it does work very well for a lot of people. We needed to make sure that the reading order was going to be logical and flexible to match the various different reading paths that occur visually, and I'm going to give you examples of those in a bit. We knew we would need to identify all of the components non-visually in addition to providing visual cues. And of course, we wanted everything to be easy to use and understand because we're trying to help students learn. Like all of our other ebook content, this stuff, even though it is highly complex, needed to be reflowable. If a student really, really wants to read an annotated essay on their tiny little phone screen, they can. I very much don't recommend it, but if it works for you, go for it. And we decided that we wanted this to be technologically simple. We didn't want to build a new authoring system. We didn't want to have to prioritize this work with the main engineers of our platforms. So we just did this in straight HTML and CSS. It's just a lot of very creative styling. There's not even JavaScript involved. And of course, we wanted to improve the experience for all students. So once you've defined your project, step 3 is to question absolutely everything about the current